Good morning and welcome to our first presentation, virtual presentation of the year for 2019. My name is DJ Netz and I'm the immediate past president of our local ATD-Cascadia Chapter. And joining me today, I've got Steve Brooks, who is our Director of Member Services. And today our topic is to present the State of the Industry report and also to have a little bit of time to talk about the state of our chapter. And so I'll be facilitating the first half, and Steve's going to...
I'll be talking about the state of our chapter.
Yep. And meanwhile, with this platform, you've got the ability to type in questions, and we'll answer those questions in real time. So while I'm presenting, Steve's going to monitor the chat and the questions that come in, and we'll pause and answer questions in real time. And then when it's time for Steve to present, I'll monitor the questions that you type in. So if you've got questions about any of the metrics that we're going to present today, or questions about what our chapter is going to offer up this year, let us know.
Great, looking forward to that great dialogue. This is a two-way conversation.
Yes. So here's our agenda. We're going to have some comments and show some sharing about the State of the Industry report. We're going to look at some specific metrics, and you'll also get to see how these metrics were calculated, and make sure and get some context around some of the findings that come out of this report. And then Steve's going to have some remarks and some information about the state of our chapter. And there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers and questions and listening at the end. So the State of the Industry report. It's been a report that's been ATD National has a research arm, and every year they produce this report. They've been doing this since 2003, and this report is a free benefit for people who are members of National ATD. So every year you've got this report that's available to you, and it has been pretty consistent in terms of the method and what they track. And so they always examine 13 efficiency and expenditure indicators. And for last year's report, they were able to survey and talk to 399 organizations. And since 2008, as far back as I've been able to track, when they do this report, every year they're able to survey between almost 300 to 475 organizations. So they make a big effort to get a representative sample across all industries and all sorts of sizes of organizations, and they select different organizations each year. So it's not the same set of organizations that they measure year in and year out. So good. So these 13 metrics that we're going to talk about, that we're going to focus on today, we're going to look at them in two ways. So we're going to do a quick pass and just reveal what the metrics and what these expenditures were. And as we do that, I encourage you to think about them from actually a personal way. What's your personal first-hand experience in terms of how much money was invested in you from your organization in training and development? And also, how do they what's the investment focused on, and the funding sources? So think about some personal benchmarking there. Also think about what your audience, what your tribe, what your learners, what do they get in proportion in relationship to some of these findings. And then maybe think about your industry and what's unique about your industry and the level of investment and spending on training and development. This State of the Industry report has a lot of detail. We don't have time to get into all of it, but they do break down into certain industry breakouts. So you can find additional detail about the finance and insurance sector and how they invest in training and development, manufacturing, healthcare, and there's a fourth breakout for management consulting and business services, which tend to have a higher investment in training and development than the other three categories. So we're going to quickly have a first pass of these 13 metrics, and we'll have a second pass. And that's when we'll linger a little bit more, talk about maybe some interpretation of what these metrics might mean for this year, and we'll examine kind of the trajectory of where things are going. And you'll also get to see how the metric is calculated. So that might be a takeaway that you can have for your organization. And we're also going to do a comparison. The State of the Industry report has a separate measurement, a separate focus. They evaluate what they call the best companies. And these are people who, organizations who have a higher commitment to training and development and are known for delivering world-class training programs. And so you can see the differences and the gaps in what this best category of organization, how they're investing in training and development compared to the larger group. Good. So our first metric, the average direct expenditure per employee. So it turned out to be almost $1,300, $1,296. So think about that. Did you personally receive almost $1,300 worth of training and development last year? And again, think about your tribe, your learners. Collectively, did they get a commensurate amount of training? Do you know of anybody who got more training? It's interesting to think about if you look at everybody in your organization and collectively, what's the individual investment? So this is about $23 higher than last year's. So it's a 1.7% increase over last year, which actually happens to be, the report says, the same rate of inflation. Inflation was at 1.7%. So we're keeping up. This training, this investment is holding steady. Cool. Here's another metric. Annual learning hours used per employee. This is different from learning hours available. We'll look at that later. But actual number of learning hours consumed, taken, formal training hours used per employee. Let's pause and talk about this definition. Most of these metrics that we're going to talk about today are focused on formal training hours. They don't try to account for on-the-job training, people who are doing some independent study, or people who are contributing to wikis or knowledge shares. These are formal training hours defined by classroom training, seat time, online courses, etc. Cool. These next three metrics are kind of different perspectives on investments. And so some organizations approach their proportion of training investment in a certain ways. So this first metric, 3.3, yes?
Go to the slide next.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
There we go.
There we go. So direct expenditure as a percentage of payroll. Some organizations regard an investment in training and development as more from a total compensation package point of view. I used to work for an organization like that, and they kind of metered out. Well, I just sent you to a seminar last year that was expensive. It was 5 days. It was $2,000, and so your increase is, you won't get a 5% increase. You'll get a 3% increase. So some organizations treat it like that. So percentage of payroll, direct expenditure as a percentage of revenue. I worked for another organization. We were a series of branches, and at our branch, or all the branches, the general manager knew he had to send a certain amount of profit back to the mothership. And so he had some discretionary funds if it was a profitable month, and he might invest in more training as a result.
You want me to do the slides for you?
That
might be handy.
There we go. Sorry.
Let me know.
I'll get it. I'm sorry. So direct expenditure as a percentage of revenue, 1.16%. And last year it was 1.36%. So just a slight decrease. And we'll see a chart later on depicting this. And finally, Direct expenditure as a percentage of profit. Now this is an increase a little bit. Last year was 8.4%. And so it's consistent. It means that we're staying productive and we're still efficient. Most organizations are operating very efficiently. Let's look at distribution of training expenses. This is an interesting one. So think about all of the training and coordination and administration of the training, of how much of that is done in-house, how much training is supported by using external services, whether you license content or have vendors or contract trainers or send people off to professional development seminars, those external services. And then tuition reimbursement was at 8.33% last year. And that's a little bit of a drop. And we'll talk about that during our second pass.
And DJ, Sonia was wanting to ask, and perhaps you'll be getting to this, about ways that we can assure learners take advantage of the funds that are available to them.
And
most folks in her case, they don't access the funds that are available to them.
And that actually is one of the findings that we'll talk about a little bit later of this tuition reimbursement in particular. The report, if you read it, ATD's researchers were attributing it to a lack of awareness. Especially, they noticed that 83% of organizations surveyed offer tuition reimbursement, but whether it's a matter of there's onboarding and rotation of new employees, but just lack of awareness is why they're attributing this drop in the tuition reimbursement category. Good question. Keep them coming. So I'm going to operate the controls like I'm supposed to. This next metric, average employees per L&D staff member. So think of this as your student to teacher ratio. So how many learners do you support? Or if you're on a team of other trainers and other facilitators, even your training admins, your total training team divided by the number of people that you're serving. That's this ratio here. So 306 to 1, that might be startling for some of you. Some of you might think that's kind of low. I know some of our members the ratio is more like 500 to 1. So there's some kind of in context and relativity there. Let me see. So last year, it was a little bit lower last year. Last year was 297 to 1, so just a little bit of an increase. And again, this report is suggesting just economies of scale. And perhaps there could be a need to hire more L&D staff members to perhaps bring this number down a little bit. There we go. So average cost of learning hour used. So of all the learning hours that are available, maybe you have an online course catalog and you have a series of face-to-face trainings that you're able to deliver. Of all the training that was used, delivered, consumed, divided by the cost of what it took to produce and develop those materials. So last year was $76.36, a little bit lower than last year. Last year this figure was $80, average cost of learning hour used. So again, a little bit economies of scale are our play there. And there we go. Average reuse ratio, learning hours used to learning hours available. So if you think of your entire course catalog, and maybe you have some trainings and some pieces that are seldom used or infrequently delivered, but you need to have them, your annual compliance trainings, for example, periodic maintenance trainings, but then you have some courses that are used a lot. So that reuse ratio, it's a little bit higher than last year. So we have almost 54 to 1 reuse ratio. Last year it was 51 to 1. So a little bit more care and improvement in our course catalog management there.
Just to clarify, you're saying there's less reuse, so there's more new
There's more
development?
reuse. There's more reuse.
More reuse, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Cool. So, average cost of learning hour available. What does it cost to develop your trainings in the first place? What does it cost to keep them updated? And also, last year was seeing a lot of course conversions, of having to get them into, especially online courses, being converted into software and platforms that were scalable. So last year the figure was 1,809, so almost a $90 increase over the previous year. So nearly $1,900 average cost of learning available. And to put it in context, if 8 years ago in 2010, the average was only $1,400. So over that period of time, as you think of having to justify your budgets and having to think of what it takes to invest in developing a new course. They also, the report also, the researchers from ATD also say new content and updates to these courses just cost more. So that's some attribution there. So think about the size of your organization. So we saw that almost $1,900 per hour of development, and earlier we saw a metric about almost $1,300 invested in each person each year. So spending per employee by organization size. Slight increases across the board here for 2018. So small, 100 to 500 people, a little over $2,300 per employee. Mid-size organizations, $850 per employee per year. And then big corporations, 10,000 plus people, average spending is $509. And again, those decreases are due to economies of scale. They don't. These mid-sized and large organizations have already invested in the infrastructure, the server space, and the training team to be able to deliver content at economies of scale. Cool. Let me do a quick comparison. And again, a little bit of an increase for the 1 to 499 category. Last year it was only $2,016. Good. And so, average percentage of formal learning hours available via technology-based delivery methods. So your course catalog, your face-to-face offerings, your VILT, your online courses, across the industry, 41.3% of your formal learning hours were also available through technology-based delivery methods. That includes VILT and standalone e-learnings. So there's a new metric, it's newer. ATD Research introduced this in 2016. They're trying to measure the non-formal, the more experiential kinds of training that organizations are involved with. So the extent to which organizations emphasize on-the-job learning was 58.9%. Slight drop from last year. Last year was 65%. So it's still an exploratory, emerging metric. What they did find is job rotations in particular. Organizations, job rotations were the least embraced method of on-the-job learning. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. So have there been any new questions?
Yeah, kind of going back to what you were talking about with reuse. Mm-hmm. Sonia asks, thank you Sonia, about, we know a lot of organizations are converting Flash to HTML5. Yeah. How is that impacting this, training catalog issues and the reuse?
Exactly.
Are there any trends?
So It's flash conversions and also responsive design, having to make sure when we do convert the thing that it's also mobile friendly. So I know the organization I work at, that was a large part of our business is clients coming to us. We have a suite of courses that need to be converted. And so that has been happening.
Okay.
Yeah. And other members that I've talked to locally are facing the same task of finally, the threshold has been passed and they had to secure budgets to convert a series of courses.
Good news if you're a contractor in the development space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Sonia.
Good. So I said we're going to take 2 passes. Let's start our second pass at these 13 metrics. And goodness. All right. So we talked about this nearly $1,300 direct expenditure per employee.
I might just ask, because it just tagged on to the same kind of question.
Yeah.
Danielle wanted to know how they calculate reuse. I don't know if there's any
We'll see that in a few moments.
We'll see that? Okay.
So each of these slides, the next set of slides, the formula appears on each of these slides.
Good, okay.
So here, the way that ATD National Research calculates this metric is an organization's annual direct training budget divided by the full-time number of employees. So these definitions and calculations are really important. And when we get to the end, I'm going to talk about some advice. And some of this advice is making sure that your organization, your management team, and especially finance has clear definitions on how you're going to measure these year in and year out, and how you're going to talk about this in terms of budgetary allocations. And so some organizations, for this metric, for example, full-time employees. What about part-time employees? Do we include contractors? Many organizations rely on contractors. And so it's important to have conversations about these things and who gets to be counted in these calculations. So for here, this direct expenditure per full-time employee. So last year, it was nearly $1,300. The best awards winner, that category, those subset of organizations who responded to this research survey and kind of represent world-class training organizations. First of all, as we look at these best results, this year's report is a little bit special because the organizations who are in this category tended to be mid-sized and large corporations. And so it's skewing the numbers a little bit because they can enjoy economies of scale. And so that's going to be a factor as we look at these. And then just as a benchmark, if we think back to 2006, right before 27 and fun financial events of 2008 happened, at its high was $1,500, $1,531. And it's taken all these years for this metric to creep back up and slowly recover from that drop that happened in 2008. And so here's the supporting chart you can take a look at. We've got 7 years of data here. And again, you can see the blue line, the consolidated or all results, is at a steady increase from 2011, very incrementally climbing back up. But you see the best category is just it spikes and lows and jumps all around. And again, the researchers indicate it's simply economies of scale, but also periodically when those organizations have to make investments in new infrastructure and new curriculum is when those spikes occurred. Good. So, learning hours used per employee. So there's the calculation of the hours consumed divided by full-time employees. Our consolidated result was 34.1. And again, that's unchanged from last year. So we're holding steady. And the best award categories, those people in those organizations are able to enjoy more training, more hours of training. So nearly 48 hours of training for those organizations. Last year, it was even higher. It was 53.8 hours of training for people who are in the best organizations. And again, same story for all respondents, all survey respondents, just incrementally, number of training hours being used is just on a steady rise. Again, we're holding from last year's result, 34.1 hours, 2 years in a row. So we're holding steady. Whoops. Steve, you got to help me.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm going to let go.
Sounds good.
Great. All right, direct expenditure as a percent of payroll. So again, this calculation, your annual direct training budget divided by your annual payroll without benefits and taxes. And again, this report will give you solid definitions. Sometimes people say, well, do you include travel? Do you include this? Do you count hours that people were away from work? It's all in the report to get at that granular detail, but let us know if you have questions such as that.
Speaking of which, can you help clarify again the difference between consolidated and best?
Yep. Consolidated is all the respondents who were surveyed last year,
Okay.
which included the best. And then the best were those organizations that it's only a handful of 20 to 30 organizations every year. But they just have a higher commitment to delivering world-class training.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
Good. So our next metric as a percentage of revenue, annual direct training costs divided by your actual revenue. And again, this kind of speaks to an investment-based philosophy instead of a deficit-based or how much do I have to spend instead of what do I get to invest. So organizations that have that kind of mindset. So it's a little bit down from last year, so 1.16%. Last year it was 1.36%. And our best award winner is 0.45%. Again, simply due to economies of scale. And finally, as a percentage of profit, 8.44%. So annual profit divided by annual direct training budget. And so what do you choose to invest in once you've calculated your profit? Just slight increase over last year. Last year was 8.4%. This year it's 8.44%. So that's good. So let's look at tuition reimbursement.
Got it.
So tuition reimbursement, 8.33%. Actual tuition reimbursement costs divided by total training budget. And this is a drop. Last year it was 12.75%. Best award winners, last year it was 13%. This year it's 11.17%. And again, it's the research report, they made a point to say they're attributing it to lack of awareness. And it's okay. And here's another view of this, broken out by size of organization. So small organizations, less than 500 people, 7.35%. Mid-sized organizations, 8.03%. And organizations of more than 10,000 people, 11.51%. So if you remember that pie chart that we had of, it was like 65% of training was done in-house and facilitated and administered in-house, and 26.39% was external services. So these are people who are hosting things for you, content that you license, consultants and outside developers and contractors that you use. 26.39%. What I like to do, this is an old chart from an old State of the Industry report. That pie chart, that distribution, has really held steady and been consistent. So down there in the purple, that's your tuition reimbursement. So if I were to build this chart again with this bar chart format, that'd be a really thin sliver this year because of the 8.13%. But generally, 25% of training expenditures are for outside services. And then that navy blue bar has been consistent. 60 to 65% of training expenses are held in-house. So again, as you think of, if you feel like, hey, we need help, or we should bring in a contractor, or we should include maybe some licensed content or invest in things like that, this kind of can help maybe normalize that or help justify that. Do we have a question come in?
Not yet.
All right, cool. So our next metric, there we go, our student to teacher ratio, if you will. Total full-time employees divided by total learning and development staff. And so 307, the best award winners, it was 308 employees per L&D staff member. A little bit, this is an increase. Last year, it was 297 employees overall. And for best, it was down to 239 employees. So again, just a slight trend here. I think, there we are. Let's look at the graph.
Yeah.
So you can see it goes up and down over the years, but it changes more dramatically for the best award winners. Very good. So let's talk about cost per learning hour used. So again, all of your learning hours, your entire catalog, even those things that are only taught once a year maybe, or once a quarter. So all your face-to-face training, all your online trainings, all of that potential divided by the total number of learning hours consumed. So the cost to develop all those offerings divided by the total number of learning hours that were actually consumed. So for all results was $76 per hour, and the best award winners, it was $31 an hour. And again, a slight drop over last year. Last year it was $80 for the consolidated, and it was $28 for the best award winners. And so if we look at our chart, we can see pretty steady, consistent behavior. Again, through the use of, we have more standardized software, using templates, being able to leverage different formats. We're able to keep costs steady. And so this one, cost per learning hour available. So all learning hours divided by the total number of learning hours produced. So the total cost to develop all of your offerings divided by the number of offerings that actually were produced. So this year it was $1,896. Again, that's an increase over last year. Last year it was $1,809. So a $90 increase over last year. And last year's best organizations was $1,027, and this year it's higher. It's $1,547. And again, the cost to produce new content and to update existing content is what the researchers are attributing this to, is those two activities. And we can look at our chart here. Again, the consolidated, that navy blue line, it stays pretty steady, just up a little incremental increases year over year. And the best organizations, that light green line, is more. It's just variations of what they had to invest in a given years.
Here's the
Reuse
answer
ratio.
that you were asking about, Danielle.
So total number of learning hours consumed versus learning hours available. So your whole course catalog, your face-to-face training, your VILTs, your e-learnings, all those hours that are available versus the total number of learning hours that were consumed results in your reuse ratio.
Okay.
And so last year was 53.8%. The year before that, it was 51.1, so slight increase. Again, indicating efficiencies in learning delivery and course catalog management. So what's next? And if you can see the reuse ratio, those best organizations are really ascending, again, because they're able to think about this and devote resources to making sure that they've got an effective catalog and they're offering, they just don't include everything in their course catalog, and they retire courses as they need to. Good. Here's a fun one. So this is an old chart. This is not this year's, but it's fun to look at this old chart. So from 2014, of how we look at how training was delivered. And in 2014, 50% of it was traditional face-to-face classroom training. And 9.75% of it was VILT, instructor-led online. So 60%, a little over 60% of training was still delivered with a live instructor. And then there's these rest of these delivery methods of online and print and mobile. And if you look at mobile, this is a fun one, was 2.04% in 2014.
Okay.
So let's look at
Today.
this year's report. So all instructor-led, that big blue slice of the pie there, 66.84%, 67% of all training is still delivered with an instructor. So that blue block indicates your face-to-face and your VILT. And then e-learning, all self-paced formal learning, 29.26%. And then mobile technology has finally increased from 2.04% 4 years ago to 2.13%. So I'll leave that interpretation up to everybody else, but there's a story there, I think. And there's still these itty-bitty, these really thin slices of the pie are still things like self-paced print materials and DVD and CD-ROM. Those things are becoming obsolete, and the report addressed that this year. So let's look at next. Good. Emphasizing on-the-job learning. So the blue and the green slices of the pie, 20.26% and 38.56%. So 59% of organizations emphasize on-the-job learning to a high or to a very high extent. What's new this year is that 2.61% of saying not at all. That's a drop from the previous 2 years. It was higher. So ATD research was encouraged to see that a drop in that not at all category. Let's examine, and what I think is more important in this report is what does these on-the-job trainings or learning, how do they show up? And so this year, they do measure this, and this year there's an emphasis on knowledge sharing through on-the-job, in person, so having a buddy, having a mentor, having people to talk to, having a network to go to with your questions was very important. On-the-job coaching by peers, on-the-job coaching by managers. So again, that high touch, high personal, I need somebody to connect to and help me through this. Job shadowing, 28.5%. Knowledge sharing on the job with the aid of technology, so those wikis, those SharePoints, other repositories for information, the Yammers, the microblogging, was still sanctioned and useful activity. The final two, stretch assignments and rotational training programs, again, these were decreases from the previous 2 years. And I think it's interesting. My interpretation is I think the training function needs to maybe make an effort to get better at this. How do we advise people? How do we help work with managers to co-create stretch assignments that are structured and make sense? And the rotational training programs, there's a lot of cultural things to overcome. Most managers don't want to let their good people go. And there's a few organizations where rotational programs are successful, and it's because they've normalized this. The people are going to rotate in and out every 9 months or 12 months or whatever the program is.
Before we go on, can
Yeah.
we go back a slide? Because we had some questions about the, that's good, about the different modes of delivery. And Tony was asking, was there anything in the report about whether those modes of delivery vary by the type of organization or the size of the organization?
Yes, there are. If you look at the report, I don't have time to bring them up today, but they do break down, again, by finance, healthcare, manufacturing,
Okay.
and business services. And yes, for example, healthcare, it's notoriously difficult to have enterprise-wide effective e-learning.
Okay.
And so they still rely on face-to-face. They still rely on huddles and high-touch ways of delivering information.
And just a clarification, when they talk about self-paced learning, does that include more than e-learning, or is it just really
Yes.
synonymous?
And maybe I can dig up the definition in real time, but there's a few other things that are self-paced. So self-paced print, for
okay.
example. But there's a fuller definition in the report.
Okay.
It's not just asynchronous e-learning.
Got it. Thank you.
Great. So let me, as I always do when I do this, let's conclude with a little bit of advice, then I'll turn it over to Steve.
Okay.
And so, again, as you are intrigued and study and consider these metrics, it's important for your organization when you're benchmarking and when you're trying to justify different investments to measure your groups consistently. Sometimes it makes sense to combine employees with managers. Sometimes in some organizations it makes sense to measure the budgets for employees and managers differently. And again, same with your contractors and vendors. The training function is devoted to, it does spend a lot of time training contractors and onboarding contractors. And so what part of the budget, how should they show up when you're budgeting? Include a CFO or some other finance person, whatever you have, to help you validate your definitions, the data and the process for gathering data. Examine your training costs in context, whether it's seasonally. Some organizations are affected by cyclical patterns throughout the year and sales cycles, but also in the context of your industry. So it's again, those four categories that ATD research emphasizes are kind of helpful for benchmarking that. Again, define what formal learning hours means in your organization. Sometimes it's some organizations do rely on that buddy system or initial mentoring, and so if that needs to be captured as specifically, make an effort to do that. And as you're gathering data and feedback and trying to justify your programs, it's important to also get some anecdotal feedback too. So remarks from your smile sheets and kind of attitude surveys are important to kind of weave into the story of the good things that your training program's doing. So again, I love talking about this report. If you have questions after this or throughout, let me know. But in the meantime, I'm going to turn this over to Steve to talk about our chapter.
Okay.
And I will start monitoring.
Right. Please do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to say a few things, and we definitely still want to encourage you to ask us those questions. What would you like to know about the state of our chapter? So we'll be monitoring that in our chat.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to start with just a quick rundown of who is the leadership in our chapter, because after all, we're here for you. And we would love to open dialogue and get your input on ways we can improve our chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Our top leaders would be Diane, serving a second term as president. Next year she'll be followed by Aaron.
Mm-hmm.
We're still enjoying DJ's support as past president. And of course, many of you know Kathleen continues to serve as our executive director
Mm-hmm.
and has really been the glue for our chapter all these years.
Kathleen.
Speaking of glue for the chapter, we also have Grant coming back. He came back last year to serve a little more modest role as board of director. He's been president for a couple of times. And
He has now held every single position on the board.
Exactly. Has
Yeah.
long, deep experience, but we're really fortunate to have him in this role to keep our board running as efficiently as possible. And in other specialized roles, we have Bob Fordham, focused on the professional development for our members, myself on general member services, and you'll notice we have an open position. So please, everybody, think about maybe joining us, because it's a lot of fun to be on the board. And the person who would fill this role as director of events would be responsible for putting together the kind of special events that we have throughout the year.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot of fun, and you can work with a team. It's not just everything on your shoulders. So please do consider it. It's open to all members who have been active in the past year or so.
Mm-hmm.
So please think about that in terms of being on the board or even helping with that effort as part of a team.
Mm-hmm.
What has the board been up to this past year? There's really two things that stand out in my mind. Balancing the budget has been a big thing. We did have a rough patch financially about 2 years ago, and so that's been a huge focus for us to make sure we're getting a balanced portfolio in our revenues. And I'm happy to report that we're starting to turn that corner.
Mm-hmm.
We actually have, instead of just surviving month to month, we have some savings that we can use for expenses over a set of months. Now, are we done? No. We're still working on this, and we'll be soliciting people's input, but there is some good news that we're seeing that trend towards a positive financial footing. The other thing that stands out in terms of the past year or so is that we've developed a more consistent suite of events on a regular schedule. And so this generic calendar that I'm showing, pay no attention to the actual dates. It's more important to focus on the weeks, okay? But there's three main things. So usually it's Tuesdays, the second Tuesdays of the months, the e-learning group will have their meetings. Then on the third Mondays, we have our chapter meeting. Now, for anybody who's been to our chapter meetings, they'll know that they've been also revitalized. And they're really fun, engaging. You meet people, you learn things, and they've been going very well, and we'll be continuing starting with next month. Finally, we've pretty consistently had virtual programs toward the end of the month, usually on the last Thursday. This is one of those virtual programs right now. And in a second, I'll be talking about other ways that we'll be expanding that. So towards the end of the month, virtual outreach for those people throughout the state to be able to join in the community. I want to turn attention to plans for 2019. And no questions yet?
Not yet.
Okay. Please let us know if you have any questions about the chapter and where we're heading. This is, I think, I'm going to get back to this, but this is the year of growth that we're pushing towards. And as a member, you can expect continual benefits towards your networking. As I said, we have our monthly chapter meetings as one venue, but also, and I alluded to this, I want to grow our virtual offerings for networking. And we're going to have these virtual communities of practice, and we're going to have a kickoff of that offering next Monday. So look for that on our events calendar. It's called Ready, Set, Goals. It's still time to register for that. It's free. It's basically a lunchtime virtual learning, excuse me, that will kick off. And it's an opportunity not only to learn about setting goals, but to actually meet people, and we'll break off into cohorts of people that will help support you in attaining those goals. So great opportunity to meet some people there next Monday. Look for that on our event calendar. Members can also expect more programs. That's actually an open call to everybody, because in the next few months we have a lot of openings for spots to fill. So if you're a presenter, facilitator, you know people who have plug-and-play presentations and events that we can put on in the next few months, please let us know. I'm going to ask everybody, and this goes for anything that I've been talking about in terms of encouraging you to volunteer. If you could just type the word volunteer in the chat, we'll be able to capture that and get back to you if you have anything along those lines. We're going to be also starting this year looking to half-day, full-day workshops. So far we have a 2-day workshop, Fundamentals of Training, but our chapter wants to grow. There's that theme where, again, those offerings. So be on the lookout for that, or if you have ideas, we welcome that input. Next month, we're going to be forming a group of various representatives throughout the chapter to really zero in and brainstorm on how we can grow in terms of membership, the offerings that we give, and even the conference, not just in the numbers of attendees, but in the innovative ways. We had a great conference thanks to Natasha Palandri with a lot of innovative new ideas, and we want to continue that trend going forward. Have any questions come in?
A couple. One question is going back to the state of the industry section, and I think I'd love to hear your take on this.
Okay.
From members that you've talked to. So Bruce is asking, just from our sense of our local community and this local area, how does our efforts for training and development compare to these national? So any of this investments, what do we know about locally? How do we stand up to these national, any of these trends?
That's a kind of interesting question, and a potential for maybe our chapter to fill that need out there. Because I'm sure, like you, many people ask the same question: how do we compare here in the Pacific Northwest? And our chapter can do anything that its members find interesting to take on. And so if you have a real passion about answering questions and filling those gaps, let us know. And it's possible we have some other members that have a better answer to that. So again, I would encourage you to give us a little message in the chat, and we can follow up with you on that.
So Bruce, I know from talking to members who are in healthcare, that's what I do know locally. There's I think there's a higher commitment to training. Also in financial services, I don't know if it's higher than the national, but it's strong. The financial institutions in this area do have a world-class commitment to delivering great training and to keeping their employees current and their annual up-to-date with compliance and various certifications. And also with healthcare, we have passionate people in the local area who want to solve the e-learning roadblocks that they got, and to get computers in their stream of workflow for people so that they can get information. So I don't know money-wise, but I do know that the strategic initiatives that are done in healthcare and in financial, in our banks and credit unions, the commitment is strong, and the progress that they're making is remarkable.
That's good news.
Yeah.
I like that. I'm going to finish by talking once more about volunteering. We did have a question from Sonia about the support that someone who might step up to be like a director of events would get. And yeah, we're one of the few chapters that has an executive director, Kathleen, and that is such a relief as a board member that she's there to cover the business side of things and the operations. And there's so many minutia. Just the other day I asked her, we had to come up with some insurance documentation, right?
Yep.
She can pull that, and so she's constantly helping the board in that way. And then just the team on the board is always very supportive.
Yeah.
Diane's leadership has been great, and she really is fun, and makes it a very positive experience. So hope that answers your question, Sonia. And I think that we had another question. See what kind of data from the top Portland employers. I agree. So to Bruce's and I'm sorry, Tristia's questions around that, this may be something that we take on.
Great virtual session, just to have a sharing.
That's true, right?
So maybe we can fashion a session out of that. So yeah, to get, maybe not the finances, we can't always share those, but to certainly talk about the progress of, and maybe our delivery modes, and how that's shifted over the past 5 to 10 years.
Right. Speaking of shifts, I did notice Dan shared about how, let's see if I can scroll down, things have changed over the years. I think
he was saying back in 2004 or something, it was 71% instructor-led.
Right.
And so technology has been able to serve as a big support and a big form of change in our industry.
Thanks for sharing that, Dan.
Good.
Excellent.
So we're almost out of time. We really appreciate your engagement and participation in this. We hope this is useful. Our chapter's been able to do this, a state of the industry presentation for the past 4 years, and we appreciate this. It's also an opportunity to have questions and listen to the things that are concerning you. So we also appreciate Brand Live for providing the studio space and production support. And otherwise, our next month we're going to have our virtual session on more effective decision making and frameworks for that. And in March, our virtual session will have deal with intercultural communication as it relates to training. So you can look forward those onto our ATD events page. Otherwise, thank you so much for working with us and tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Have a great day.
Thanks.